Now, for those who don't know, Rangitoto Island is in the mouth of Auckland's main harbour, and it's a great big volcanic cone. So early morning, we're seeing David and Brian busy getting their breakfast together.
Of the level.
Oh, flying still.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Well, it starts like all of our raids.
With a Worcester. Any oyster yet?
Can't really taste it.
Oh, nice.
We've seen her in action in relatively light conditions, and now she's running fast in really heavy conditions.
Yeah.
Particularly, when you see the view over the stern and have a look at the wake. Actually going quick enough there to overtake the wave pattern.
Holy cow.
You're on. You go on. Kingy. Splashing. Beautiful. Oh, nice fish. Oh yeah. Well done.
Did you want to take the video?
This is number 2. One of the things that's particularly important in a cruising dinghy is the boat must have a comfortable motion. If you're going to spend hours sailing in a small boat in a cramped situation, the boat can't pitch and it can't roll too much. Now, this is pretty sloppy, awful conditions. Doesn't really justify that Pathfinder being reefed. But it's making good progress, and you'll see that although the waves are irregular and difficult, boat's pitching motion, even there, is relatively smooth, and it's not slowing down and stopping. That being the important part. So it's not rolling much at all, and it's just pushing on. So that happens right back at the early stages of design. It's got to be designed to ride smoothly in those conditions. See that the skipper in that boat is sitting right back at the pivot point. So the bow's going up and down a bit, the stern's going up and down a bit, but the skipper is getting a really nice, comfortable ride.
Do you want the photo next, John, or the next video?
No, we'll have a chat about that. No, we can wait for that one, please.
Okay.
Yeah, if we can go back to the screen where we've got everybody on.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Yep. Stop. Yeah.
That's it. Thank you. Now, you'll note that both of those cruising dinghies have actually got their two masted rigs. And the reason for that is those boats are balanced under a wide variety of sail combinations. So at worst, with the main down, the boat is still balanced and controllable. They tell me that it's almost, yeah, they're very stable, very comfortable. It's like switching all the bad weather off when you drop the main. They're controllable within about 180 degrees downwind, broad reach one side, downwind, broad reach the other. In really extreme conditions, they still won't go to windward, but that's the case with any small boat. They do have limits, but that makes it controllable. And particularly in a family situation where you've got some inexperienced, apprehensive people on board and the weather gets really, really nasty, down comes the main and you're balanced. The boat will cruise along very gently, very quietly, under control. And if you wish, even with the main up, you can pull the mizzen on hard and the boat will sit reasonably close to head to wind and it'll just hunt around a little bit. But you can sit and stop and say, okay, let's have a talk about what we're going to do next, or let's get the thermos out and we'll have our cup of tea, right? Things like that. So I get people say, why do you put two masts on your little cruising dinghies? And if I'm feeling a bit sarky, I'll say to them, well, you know, these are cruising dinghies and people are going to sleep on board. So they're going to be wanting to set a tent over the cockpit area and you need a pole at each end to tie the tent to. Yeah. There is an element of truth to that, but really it's about balance and trim. You can trim the boat so that the thing will steer itself on quite a wide variety of courses. So again, small boat, you're not going to have cruise, so you can have watch on watch. You can't change skippers quite often. You're on your own or got somebody inexperienced on board. You can actually set the boat up so it'll steer and just sit back, have a bit of a break, read your book or whatever, and let the boat trundle along. Don't go to sleep. We're generally not far enough away from land to do that. One of my friends ran his boat up on the only beach for miles. He hit it dead center and he'd been asleep for several hours. Yeah, just ran the thing gently up the beach. So these boats are truly designed as cruisers. They are not converted racers. And converting a racer can be a bit problematic. And we read a lot about Frank Dye and the Wayfarer and all the amazing things that he achieved in that boat. But really, the things that he achieved say a lot more about Frank Dye than they do, in fact, about the boat. The boats are not really that well suited. They work, but they could be better. Right, so can we have the next one, please, Ken?
All right, the photographs.
Next photograph, please. So people say to me, hey, gaff rig, it's slow. We're not going down the road of gaff rig. This is AWOL, absent without leave. Yeah. She's got a prod, so she carries a single luff kite. She's got a fully battened main and a short gaff, about 110% jib. And these things are really quick. David tells me he's been up around 18 knots in his, and that's on the GPS. They're quite competitive against a lot of the race boats, even though they're a little bit overweight. So anybody says to you, don't choose a gaff rig, well, the advantages are that the mast is generally pretty short, a lot shorter than a sloop rig of the same area. So you don't have the issues around getting the thing on a trailer to tow it, the overhang of the mast. You don't have the issue of pushing a long, heavy mast up and staying it. The sail is much more controllable, because if you just ease the peak halyard, that's the one that lifts the outer end of the gaff up, you lose about half the drive off the sail. So if you're sailing into a really heavy gust and you don't have time to pull a reef down, just ease that peak halyard, and it only needs to go out maybe a handspan. And as I say, you've lost half of the windage up top. Okay, so if we can go on another one. Yep, that's it. Next pick. At the other end of the scale, now most cruising dinghies are pretty light. They're designed and generally used when the water is reasonably warm and the weather is predictable. Now this is Pilgrim. Pilgrim's got about 250 kilos of lead underneath and a shallow keel with a centerboard going down through that. She's gaff rigged, but have a look if you can see, because there's a blank spot on my screen here, at the skipper sitting down in the port aft quarter, right? He's right up to his armpits inside the boat. So cold weather, nice and sheltered. It's got a similar layout to Pathfinder, where up forward and up underneath the foredeck, there's a flat each side of the center case, so you can lie down, which is another issue around sailing dinghies that are used for cruising. Must be comfortable at night, right? A bad night's sleep is not going to make a good day sailing the next day. So these have got, like Pathfinder, big flat area, so you can roll a full-sized single airbed out. You can, and you're comfortable down in there, nice and sheltered. So now this is Jeff Hagenrader's boat. He's a professional boat builder on the northeast coast of the USA, and she's for sale, by the way. He's been racing his in the day fleet, mainly against the likes of Herreshoff 16s and Herreshoff 12s. And he said the first time he turned up, the handicap put him off first because he thought this wasn't going to work. He's now last at the start. So he's been doing pretty well. They haven't been able to catch him yet. So even though it's got very high sides and it's a bulky looking boat, the thing sails pretty well. So don't be put off by a boat that appears to be designed for comfort rather than just for sailing performance. You can get both. So next, please. Now, we tend to think of open boat cruising in terms of sailing boats. You can, in fact, go cruising in an outboard motorboat, and there are people who do that. But rowing is a really nice way of going cruising. Now, a lot of people, me included, will shoulder a pack, put your big heavy boots on, and off you go up into the wilds. Now, I can carry around 22 kilograms in my pack, much more than that, and I'm starting to feel it a bit. Now, 22 kilograms when you're going away for a week is not very much. You know, particularly when you're thinking that you're going to have your tent, you've got all your cooking gear, you've got water, you've got stores, food, changes of clothing, all that stuff. It's very difficult to get a really comfortable week away in 22 kilograms. And one of these, you could carry twice that without any trouble at all. In fact, she'll go cruising with 2 people. So that's Joanza, and that's Alan Thorne from the Faversham Community Boat Shop in England. And they build boats like that to teach their students how boats go together. So thank you. And next one. I think the next one is a video. Am I right? So safety. You've got to be able, if you're going outside the range of immediate assistance, and I really mean immediate assistance, you must be able to self-rescue. So these guys out off Rottnest Island in Western Australia are tipping out one of my navigators to see if they can work it. See how she floats and what she's going to be like when she comes back up. And you can see here she's got side buoyancy as well as end tank. And she's floating pretty high, but the rig is such that it's stopping it from going completely over. You don't want them to go upside down. You see, as I say, she's floating fairly high. She's not going to bring up a lot of water when she comes up. And the camera, I think, goes around the other side about now. No, that's right. Trying to, pushing the rig down to see whether it'll keep going. But no, it stays up. Now that's just the plain tube with plugs in the end. Nothing. If you can make the cars airtight, you don't need to fill them up with foam. All the foam's doing is displacing water, and you've already done that. The yard at the top of the sail is a large part of that ability, because it tries to float as well. So around you go, and there's only one person. Remember, Navigator's a reasonably big boat. It's 15-footer. And up she comes. And he's on board. He hasn't bailed it. He's shooting in.
It comes a good 2 inches under the seats more. It's certainly the top of the case as well.
And he's sailing. Hasn't bailed it out. This is ideal. If you capsize in the mouth of the channel or in the harbour mouth or mouth of the marina, you're going to want to get the boat moving, and it might take some time to bucket the thing out. Now, there is water in there, but you can sail.
So even if they weren't totally tight, you wouldn't get much. No, I don't think so either. I think it'd be fine. Unless you're sitting there for a long time. But that's going along nicely. So we can sail it.
Now, there's a point there which I should mention, is that the centreboard must stay down, or alternatively, you must be able to pull it out. Now, on SCAMP, what we did with those is we put a little tail on the very tip of the centreboard. We drill a hole in the tip, we fill it full of epoxy, and we stuck a piece of 6mm rock grade in there with about 250 or 300 millimetres of it sticking out with a stopper knot in the end. Now sure, there's a theoretical drag here, but it's so small that you're never going to notice it. If the boat goes on its side and the board comes up into the case, and you get round the other side, you can grab hold of it, get your foot against the boat and pull it out. As long as you've remembered to let the centreboard lift and tackle off. So safety, you have to be able to recover.
Yeah, for sure.
If you can't, then you shouldn't go outside the possibility of immediate rescue. And sadly, Peter Cavisi died a couple of years ago.
Oh.
Very sorry to lose him. Okay, so Nick, back to the screen. Do we have any questions so far?
What do you think about gaff versus balanced lug in the in terms of the commentary you're making about the gaff rigs with the, you know, do you have any sort of thoughts? I wasn't quite sure if any of your designs had balanced lugs. I should have probably looked.
Oh
before
yes,
I asked the question.
quite a lot of them. I mean, most people know what a SCAMP is. Everybody put your hand up who knows what SCAMP is? Yep. Yep. That's the classic balanced lug. Now, much above about 125 square feet, in a smaller boat, the gaff rig gives better control over sail handling and sail shape, in my opinion. Balanced lug from that getting smaller is a really nice sail. They're more powerful than people think. They are more close-winded than people think. They are really easy to handle. They're soft to jibe. They've got low sheet tensions, really good sails. I really like them in the smaller boats. In a really big boat, I would probably be looking at a Chinese junk rig. There's been some tremendous research done of late into cambered panels, which make them perform much, much better than they have done. So questions, more questions?
I have one as a complete noob on all things technical with sailing. So the Navigator I bought is a sloop rig, which I think may have been the original design from your website or just the first iteration. I noticed in light winds, and trust me, this is based on the experience of, let me think, one sail in it, that in very light winds, I was getting a lot of, I think it's lee helm, I was bearing away.
Yep.
And I was wondering, is it possible to add, or wise or stupid to add like a Genoa type sail to a furler and then furl into the regular jib shape when winds got stronger? Is it advisable to put something larger up the front?
Yes, you can, but that's not going to help your lee helm in light weather. But
Okay.
Can I ask you where you're sitting when you're experienced lee helm?
I try and sit across up near the centerboard, so amid chips, if you will.
Yeah, right. Generally speaking, lee helm, those boats balance pretty well. And there's several possibilities there. One being that the rig is not as originally designed.
Yes.
One being that you might rake the mast aft a little bit, tilt it aft.
How does one do that? Like,
oh, with great difficulty. I sell I sell boxes of that stuff. So if you want some great difficulty, when you want something you can only do with great difficulty, I'll sell you a box full.
I majored in that at uni, actually. So.
We're masters of producing difficulty here too.
You would have to fiddle around with the step, the top and bottom step, right? Okay. And alter the length of the rigging a little bit. Now, generally, there's enough play in the bottle screws, the rigging screws, to do that on the sloop. But I do know that the sloops are normally pretty well balanced. Now, another thing you can do, and this is a possibility, is you can move the jib sheet block through which the sheet goes, move it further aft.
Okay.
Right? Because if you've got it sheeted too far forward, you will have the slot between the jib and the main up towards the top of it will be closed.
Okay.
Right? And if you look at the backwinding on the main when you're going upwind as close as you can point it, the backwinding will show up as wrinkles from the tack, right, from the forward end of the boom up the back of the mast, that should not go up more than about a meter.
Okay.
Any more than that, and the jib is too close to the mainsail at the top.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
And that can cause lee helm as well.
Yeah, righto.
Yeah. So you've got a bit of playing to do there, but
Oh,
you've
look,
got
yeah, it's quite possibly user error, but
well, that too, you know.
You're here, and I'm asking you the questions. The other one was is that so when I bought it from the guy up in Moreton Bay, he said, oh, you need about 7 knots to get it going. Do they have like a base sort of wind speed before movement is possible? I wasn't aware of that.
Oh no, if the wind, if there's any movement in the air, the boat will sail if you know what you're doing.
Okay.
Right. So in very, very light weather, you move your weight as far forward as you can get.
Yeah.
You get down on the lee side.
Yeah.
And you sail it not too close to the wind, just a little bit off.
Yeah.
And you watch the telltales on the leech of the main very, very carefully, and they must flow. Right. As soon as they start flicking around behind the sail, the boat will stop.
Yeah, right.
Because that's showing you that the airflow is not attached right the way around the back of the sail, so there's no drive there.
Yeah, right.
But then you've got to sit absolutely still. You're allowed to breathe 3 times a minute, gently, right? And you've got to, not allowed to blink.
Both nostrils or just one?
Yeah, so the idea is that you're not going to disturb the boat.
Okay.
Once the boat's moving, if you move, the boat will slow down and stop.
Okay.
This is very light weather sailing. Absolutely.
Yeah, very.
Still. Don't move.
Make sure you breathe backwards too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so,
I think the other problem with it, sorry to hog it all, is I need somebody like Bruce or Kiam to actually look at the sails. I'm not entirely sure that they were, as you said, to plan or even of quality. So that might be an issue as well. But that'll all happen in time.
Yeah. Well, get out there and sail it some more.
Oh, yes. Saturday, I'll be able to report back to you a little bit.
Well, an expert is but a beginner with experience. Yeah. So get out there and get some experience.
Yeah. Thank you, John.
Right. So who's next?
I had a quick question about, I guess, design philosophy. In all the forums and things we talk about, this boat's great in this situation, or this boat. And as amateurs, we're thinking, which boat would we choose? How tightly is the design matched to the intended use of the boat? And are there kind of boats that are designed quite tightly to that? And are there boats that are designed with a range of uses in mind that are more general purpose?
Right. Well, I'm generally designing for a wider market, but I live on the shores of the Hauraki Gulf, where we can get 35 to 40 knots out of nowhere in the middle of the afternoon and be totally becalmed by 6 o'clock. Right. So, and we can get the wave states that go with those because there are fast tidal currents between all those little islands out there. And the boats have to be able to cope with all of it. And you saw the Navigator sailing in very, very light. That was the first video, the very, very light weather. And it was moving along really quite nicely. And then sailing, rocketing along in a really heavy blow. Yep. So the boats have to be able to cope with both extremes. Now, my design philosophy around performance is the word performance is best defined by suitability for purpose. So a high performance boat may in fact not be the fast one. It may be the one that is most suited to the intended use. Now, the Pilgrim, that big hefty looking thing with high sides, that's designed for the likes of the Scottish West Coast, right? Or down along the coast of South Australia, places like that, where it blows. right? So 1, we need a boat that's going to cope with that sort of weather. 2, we need to protect the skipper and crew. 3, it's got to be totally able to self-rescue. So all that is designed in. It's also, we can design, and I've done this in the past with very specialized boats like the mini-transat boats that race single-handed from France down to the Canary Islands and then across to the Caribbean. I got together with the ex-Team New Zealand meteorologist who's a weatherman, and he managed to get me information on the wave spacing and the type of waves that would most likely be encountered at various on various parts of the course for the mini transats, and the boat was designed to suit those. So if you can imagine, you pick up a pendulum and you swing it, right, and the shorter the string you've got the weight on, the faster it goes tick tock tick tock. A boat's like that. It has a natural period of oscillation. So you look at that, and then you go and have a look at the waves and the course that the boat's taking through the waves, and you can get an impulse frequency. Now, to explain impulse frequency, if you're standing behind, yeah, you're all older people, right? A bit like me, yeah. Standing behind your grandchild on a swing, and you push them at the correct impulse frequency, the swing swings further and further and further. If you push at the incorrect impulse frequency, the swing stops. And the boats are like that. If you're hitting those waves at the wrong impulse frequency, it will pitch. It will pitch and pitch and pitch, and it'll stop. Yeah. The late 1950s and 1960s racing keel boats tended to do that. They pitched a lot. They call it hobby horsing, and it's very uncomfortable, very inefficient, and the boat won't go anywhere. So these boats are designed to damp that pitching down, and they are designed for specific wave spacing. Now, that mini transat worked brilliantly in the open ocean, but in a harbour chop, it was dreadful because it was designed for specific wave spacing, specific impulse frequencies. So am I answering questions here?
Yeah, so I guess, so that was very tightly kind of tuned to particular circumstances. For dinghy cruises, what you were saying earlier on is there's a variety of circumstances that you come across. So I guess it's just a different use.
Yes, the boats are designed for specific sets of purposes, if you like. So the mini transat was designed for that race, nothing else. Did very well, 3rd place. And for, I think, about the next 5 or 6 races, every second year, it was in the top 10. So it did very well. And our cruising dinghies, though, have to cope with everything that gets thrown at them. So they're designed differently. Now, all of the features that I've been talking about the motion of the boat, the stability of the boat, the rigs, the comfort for the crew and the skipper, all of that starts when I sit down at a piece of paper with a pencil. And you should do the same. You should have when you're selecting your boat, you go and have a think about, what am I going to do? Where am I going to use it? What are the circumstances under which I'm going to be using? Is it going to be sailed on a nice Sunday afternoon? Or am I going to go a bit further up the coast and have to cope with whatever comes along and all this? So you write yourself a brief. And once you've got that, then you can say, does this boat that I'm looking at today, does that fit that brief? Because if it doesn't, you're in trouble. Very few people will do that. They'll read a book about some adventurer who's gone off and done something really, really wild. And they say, oh, wow, that was an amazing book. I'll have one of those boats. It may, in fact, not suit your purpose. It may not be a performance boat in the context of suitability for purpose. So first thing, figure out what you want to do and where you're going to do it and how often. And then you start thinking about what boat will fit that. And I, as a designer, have to do that for the customer. So I talk to my customers when I'm doing a custom design, and we work all that out. We'll even sit the person down and measure, right? We measure the height from the underside of the thigh to the floor, from the back to the inside of the calf. We measure the reach, we measure the everything that fits, and we'll design a cockpit that fits. And I've had people that I've done that for say, is this needed? Yes. And then they get in the boat when it's all done and say, hey, this is really nice. You know, even the angle of the backrest, things like that, and the distances to various controls and things. It's all within reach, but it doesn't intrude on their personal space. So it can come down to very fine stuff.
That's really excellent. Thank you. That's so helpful. And I don't want to dominate the questions, but I just have one more. I noticed Michael Storr has just joined us as well. Notice, John, you haven't gone down the path of designing canoes and really small boats like that. Any reason for that?
I've built several. It's not my particular area of expertise or of interest. I do have 2 kayaks, and mainly because my partner can't sort of figure out how to row because she can't look where she's going. I say, well, you know, most of us look back to where we've been anyway. So, yeah. So, yeah. But, yeah, Mick does a really good job on the canoes, and it would be hard to do better. My boats are really very different to his. Yeah.
And also in terms of a designer designing a boat, you design a boat and then the builders make it their own. But for example, with the Goat Island skiff, my vision of that was a day sailing boat for 2 people to take out, and most of them are sailed single-handed and on all sorts of weird expeditions and raids and so on. And it turned out to be a rowing boat, a good rowing boat, which I hadn't even thought about. You know, so it can be, sometimes it can be really exciting and positive to see what the builders end up doing with the boat, and sometimes it can be very distressing.
you got that both ways. I really enjoy looking at what people do with builds, you know, because quite often I'll learn. I'll see something that, hey, oh, that's a good idea. Yeah. Or sometimes you just shake your head and walk away.
Yeah. But an experience like that led to me not designing boats for clients anymore.
Yeah, I've pretty much given up custom design work, mainly because this is something that I do because I really enjoy it, and I don't have to earn enough money to live off it. But yeah, I would rather, if something's annoying me and taking the pleasure out of it, I'd rather walk away. Yep. So I do it for fun, and any part of it that's not fun doesn't get done anymore.
So, John, I saw you're into motorbikes as well. Have you thought of any other careers instead of boat designer?
Now, where's that voice coming from? Yeah, I got you.
Yeah,
okay, yes. I raced motorbikes pretty seriously for quite a while. If I went to a motorcycle race meeting, I'd probably be hanging around the pits looking for 4 sale signs. So I don't do that. I don't think I'd bounce as well as I used to. But I was in Hayes Hardware in Invercargill just a little while ago. And down there they've got Burt Munro's original Indian and a really good replica of it, and his Veloset, both of which I've seen running on the beach. They've got a drum front brake TZ250 down there that was ridden by Jeff Perry, and I've ridden that bike. And there was a 250cc Greaves in there, and I've ridden that bike, that particular one, which was really, really nice to see them among many, many other motorbikes.
And motorbikes aside, that's the best hardware store I've been in anywhere.
Like, it's amazing.
The curation, the choice of the tools and stuff is fantastic.
Yeah, well, I picked up a set of Brad Point woodworking drill bits, and those are very rare. You know, the engineering ones, when you push it into a piece of plywood, it always splinters around the hole. The Brad Point ones don't do that anywhere near the same degree. So yeah, so I spotted them there and I bought them on the spot.
I'm seeing a new opportunity for hardware store tourism coming up. So keep talking.
The hardware trail.
That's right. We need to string a few of these together, gentlemen.
Yeah, there's also a really good secondhand bookshop just down the road. Yep. So anyway, going back to the boating thing, as a designer, I will sit down and write a brief. If I'm doing a new design and I'm looking not at any one person, I'm thinking, okay, I design for this gap in my range, I will write a brief. And from that brief, I will sit down and I work out, well, okay, the boat needs to be this long to fill the brief. It needs to be this wide to fill the brief. It needs to have this style of accommodation. And then I work out, it will be, I want this speed range out of it. So the speed length ratio comes into it, which also then says the displacement to length must be within a certain bracket. The sail area to displacement must be within a certain bracket. The prismatic coefficient must be in it, and so on. There's a whole lot of numbers come out of that brief. And then I start drawing and I check the numbers against the drawing at every stage. And eventually the shape comes out. And that means that I can predict the performance of the boat reasonably closely. Right? So I can get a consistent result. If I don't do that, it's a real raffle.
Yeah, and then it doesn't fit on the plywood, so you've got to go back and draw it up again.
Yep.
6 inches smaller, or 2 inches smaller.
Yeah. Oh, look, I'm really good at scarfing bits on the end of planks. So next.
John, can I ask a question? I know designs are probably like children. They're all precious. Do you have a favourite, a special one that you're particularly of your opening?
Well, put it this way: the one that I've drawn that is probably the most suitable for its intended purpose was SCAMP. Right, and people look at SCAMP. Now, Cam, can we have that last picture up, please? And this picture's a special. It really is. Right, so that is Howard Rice's SCAMP. Just afterwards, swung her into the water in Punta Arenas. The big ship behind is a replica, full size, built to plan of Magellan's ship, the Nau Victoria. The building alongside it is 2 stories high, which will give you an idea of the size of the thing. But back to the SCAMP, it's been used for some pretty amazing purposes, but the real aim of it was to be able to fit 2 adults and 2 small children into a boat which was 12 feet long or a little under, so that it didn't have to be registered. And America is a nightmare for registering boats. It had to have shelter for the kids. It had to self-recover from a full knockdown. It had to be comfortable to lie down and sleep within. and all this inside a 12-foot boat, and it's a 12-foot boat. So, and it normally has a single mast with 100 square foot lug sail on it. That one though has two masts, and it has a yawl, a Gaff yawl rig, very similar to some of my other boats. And that rig was designed specifically for the Tierra del Fuego voyage, and that you can get tremendous gusts coming down off the mountains with no warning whatsoever, and how it could either drop the peak halyard, which, like I said, reduces the heeling effect of the main dramatically, or he can drop the main completely and the boat will still be balanced on its jib and mizzen. And it will heave too. Just sit there with the mizzen swigged in hard. So all around, SCAMP is probably my favourite. But then again, you know, the favourite boat tends to be the one that I'm working on at the moment. And I'm about 90% of the way through a long steps, which is 5.85 meters rowing and sailing adventure boat, which has a cuddy like the SCAMP. The front half of the cuddy, by the way, is actually fully enclosed, so that if the boat is rolled, that boat floats with the gunnels clear. Now, some of you, if you've tipped a dinghy out, you'll know that if you get the dinghy upside down and it loses a bit of air from inside, the thing sucks down and you can't roll it to get back. This keeps the gunnels clear and you can flip it back very, very easily. So my long steps is designed to do that. It's an adventure boat, and I'm hoping to do some very long voyages with it. I haven't had a workshop for the last 18 months, but today I signed up for a house which has got, what is it? It's about 10 meters by 6 meter workshop, and there's room for me to extend it by another 4. So I have 14 by 6. And I'm looking forward to that, so I can stick long steps in there and finish the rig off and take it out and have some adventures.
Very good. Excellent.
Yeah, the SCAMP, I think, is a really significant achievement. It's a very, very difficult boat to design. And if there were 3 of them, it would be an accomplishment.
You know that they sold number 622 the other day. Plans.
You're the Bruce Kirby of the wreck boating crowd.
Yeah, but there's you travel around, particularly in America, and all the small boat meetings, there'll be a SCAMP or 2 or 3.
Yeah,
and the owners love them to bits.
Yeah, they do.
It's just wonderful. It really is. That's that. As a designer, Mick will be the same. You go to a meeting and there's 1 or 2 or 3 of your boats there, and it's just such a buzz. It's the best compliment that you could ever get.
Yeah, and seeing the enthusiasm of the people. But the thing that, like I always imagined being a designer of hot racing boats, but the replacement for that, for the type of boats I've designed, or the types of boats we design, is seeing how it changes people's lives. That people have no idea of what they can achieve. They've all worked, most of us work in jobs where there's not much visual result of what we're doing. And for a person to work through building a boat, sort out all the problems, get the boat in the water, everyone goes, wow, fantastic, how did you do it? And then they start using it and it starts shaping their lives. And that's easily the best payoff. It's fantastic.
Absolutely. I call that kind of job, and far too many people have that kind of job, I call that fighting ghosts. You go to work and you fight ghosts all day. And at the end of it, you can't see anything. Yeah. And you go home and you're stressed to bits, knowing that you've got to do it all again next day. And yeah, it's horrible. But one of the interesting things we found with SCAMP camps our major customer base turned out to be recently retired men, mostly professional men. And
what a surprise.
if you ask, and this is a very generalization, right? If you ask a woman, what are you in your deepest heart? They will generally describe themselves in terms of their principal relationships. I am a mother, I am a wife, right? And about 3 or 4 down the list, they might say, I'm a nurse, or I work in a shop, or whatever. And that is a generalization, but it's true a lot of the time. If you ask, though, a man, what are you in your deepest heart? They'll say, I'm an engineer, or I'm an accountant, or I am, right? And they'll describe themselves, first of all, in terms of how they earn their living. Now, when the job stops, it's like being way up in the air with no parachute. Some of these people are very distressed. Now, what am I? I'm not that anymore. What am I? So they come to SCAMP camp, or they go to Oz Goose build classes or whatever, and they learn how to use the tools. They learn how to coordinate their hands with their brains. They learn how to, and they see this stack of flat plywood and bits of wood, totally anonymous stuff, gradually turn into this amazing, curvy, lovely shape, and they get in it and they sail away. And it's such a life changer. And it's a real privilege to be a part of that.
Yeah, or in the case of the goose, not such a curvy shape.
Yeah, I've sailed a goose. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't come a lot curvier than a SCAMP. The boat's almost half as wide as it is long.
Yeah, yeah.
But
and,
hey,
and that's quite well disguised too.
Yeah, there's a little point there, is that people tend to look at a boat and see it moving along, and they think, oh, it's pushing the water aside, and the water goes out, and the boat goes through, and it comes back in afterwards. And they look at a very wide boat, and they think, well, it's got to push the water a long way out. And in terms of a heavy displacement boat, that's dead true. But you look at a boat like SCAMP, she only draws about 120 millimeters. So, and the bow shape, the pram bow and the odd V shape forward is something that was designed to push the water underneath, so that it only moves aside as the boat moves through it 120 millimeters instead of half the beam of the boat, which is about 0.9 of a meter. So it loses a lot less energy. And if you watch a SCAMP or that style of boat sailing, they don't leave much wake. They don't make big waves. And that's why, is that when you're pushing the water a long way, it gathers momentum. So when it turns to come back in again, it wants to keep going out. So you get a big hollow amidships, and then when it does come back in again, there's a lot of energy involved, and it makes a big stern wave.
Okay.
And so as a designer, you work really hard to try and eliminate that.
Okay. What about double enders, like your side? I mean, how does that work?
Well, to design a good double ender, what you do is you design metaphorically, right? You design a boat with a transom, and then you add the pointed stern onto that.
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't have the same amount of stability for the length that a transom boat has. And there's some crafty shaping goes on around the stern so that the water will release gradually as the stern comes to its point, rather than trying to let the water come back in one go, as it were. You follow?
Yeah.
Now, if you have a look, if ever you come across a bartender powerboat and look at the stern of that, that's a really good example of that.
Okay. But what about with the following sea? I mean, doesn't.
Oh, that's rubbish.
It's rubbish.
It's a myth.
Okay. That's good.
Yep.
Okay. But I mean, does it part the water? The double end, does it sort of?
If you were sitting,
make it more stable or less stable than a.
They are less for a given length. A double ender is generally less stable than a transom boat.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, the reason that's given in old books for the miraculous seakeeping of a double ender, being because it parts the sea, is a load of codswallop. What it is that the volume either end of the boat is quite balanced. So as a wave comes up under the stern, it doesn't push the bow down very hard there, because the bow is able to resist in about the same proportion. So the bow doesn't pitch deep into a wave and start steering the boat.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
It stays on its lines a lot better. John and I have had several discussions about this, and it's something that we try to achieve with our transom stern boats too. It doesn't necessarily have to be applied only to the to a canoe stern boat. You can also do it with a transom stern boat, but the canoe stern boat is the most traditional case.
It is Raid Sydney. They're having a chat, and the guy speaking is John Welsford.
Hi, Holly.
Hello. Steve just asked me what's going on. Sorry, I thought I had it on mute.
That's
My
not
apologies.
a problem.
Hey, how the kids
Holly,
doing
how you
tonight?
going?
Hello. Kiddos are okay. They're in bed and all tucked up.
Oh, good. Hey, good to have you here. So if you have a look at the SCAMP there, you'll see that it's slightly tucked in, just above the waterline at the transom.
Yes.
Now these boats, as they heal, they don't change trim until they start to get quite a long way over, and then they start to lift the stern a little bit, which generates more and more weather helm. Right, so that's controllable. And that's controllable as the designer. When we're drawing the boat, we're intending to have the boat reasonably neutral at all normal sailing angles with just a little bit of weather helm. And then as she heels a bit further, for safety reasons, we want the boat to try and round up a bit.
Okay.
Right? If it was the wrong way round and the boat bore away as it heeled, the boat would be unsafe.
Yep.
So again, it's another thing that we as designers design for.
I have both those with my nest boat, my outrigger nest boat. Like if you're being overtaken by a ferry wake or something, you actually find yourselves feel like you're almost up to the stern is almost up to your elbows, sort of in the wake, but the boat's staying very level. And the other thing is when it does get overwhelmed, it tends to point up very very definitely.
Yep. So next question. I must say that if you ever get to down to Punta Arenas, do go to the Museo Nao Victoria. That's the ship there. They've got a full-size replica of Darwin's Beagle.
Wow.
And among other things, they've got two full-sized, accurately built Azorian rowing whale boats. They've got a really, really close replica of Shackleton's James Caird, the boat that they sailed from Elephant Island up to the South Georgia Islands. It's a wonderful place. Okay, who's next?
Just a follow-up question to the hardware story. Was the replica of Burt Munro's motorbike, record-breaking motorbike, was that from the film?
Yes, they built that for the film. They didn't want to use the original.
Yeah, so actually that's a sorry, it's not a boating question. How close was the replica?
Oh, you couldn't tell the difference until you get really close and you can see
Motor and
that.
all?
that the old one, oh yeah, absolutely. The old one was got significant pitting and rust on it because it's been run on the beach quite a lot. The new one has got very little. It's actually, yeah, it looks like a new version of the same model.
Right.
They got an old Indian and they built a new one. It's not as quick. It hasn't got some of the fancy inside, but they converted the side valve motor to overhead valve. It hasn't got quite as many weld lines in the crankcase either.
So have you ever thought about designing motorbikes as well, John?
I designed and built 2 racing frames years ago. Reynolds 521 tubing and high temperature solid braze. Put it all together. They work quite well.
And was it the same principle as designing a boat, or was it different?
Sorry,
was it the same principle when you design a boat, or was it a different?
I was in my late teens then, and I hadn't really got started on boating. I was racing motorbikes, and I had a really strong Velocity engine that I wanted to try out as a road racer, but the frames on those were what I call goldfish, right? Goldfish is a species of carp, C-A-R-P. Yeah, these were anyway, so I built 2 frames. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time. Went down the road, ordered some tubing, got it, borrowed Dad's gas welding system, went and bought some special rods, lots of filing and lots of grinding, and no power tools. It was completely built by hand. Not the only power tool I had was a drill press. And yeah, they worked. They worked quite well, actually. So who's next? Yeah, we can have that pick gone.
Okay, can I ask a bio question? What about it could be a huge topic, but just narrowing it down to something you can say in a couple of paragraphs. How has New Zealand, being in New Zealand, influenced your thinking about boat design, boat building, all the things you've ended up doing? You know, in some ways we can say that your boats are very influenced by the UK and Scotland. But on the other hand, there's something that's quite different from the UK and Scotland. But where have they come from in terms of the New Zealand and your early experience and how you've been shaped towards that type of thinking?
Okay, well, I'm designing primarily for amateur construction, right? So I need to use a building system which works easily for people. So lap straight construction over stringers is a really easy way of building a round-sided hull. I very early on, before I started sailing really, I helped a guy build a Julian Everett design mirror door, which had the flat panel bottom sprung to shape, frames and everything stood up on it, egg crate type construction, and then the planking wrapped around it. And I've used that ever since. And that works pretty well when you've got a somewhat complex shape and interior. So I don't use it exclusively, but it's an easy one. It breaks quite a complex set of tasks down into a whole series of simple ones. And I tell people, this isn't a complicated boat to build. This is just a long series of simple jobs. And that's how it works. So they're not having to wrestle with large panels. They're not having to eyeball fair curves. So, right, all that sort of thing. It all just happens if you keep just step by step, follow the instructions. So my styling cues. Now, I taught a paper on visual communication years ago at university. Now, to give you an idea, one of the exercises was we put up a photograph of a little shopping cart, right? What you'd call a granny's shopping cart car, and a Ferrari sports car on the other side. And I talked about that and I said, look at this car here, right? The shopping cart. It's got little wheels. It's got a little short bonnet. It's very rounded in shape. It's got big windows proportional to the shape of to the size of the vehicle. And then we go and look, and there's a few other cues, right? It's got big headlights, not little ones. It's got a small grille, not a big one. And then we go and look at the Ferrari, which has got a long bonnet. It's got big fat tires. It's got small windows, and so on. Now, what are these two things telling you? Yeah. And you've got one that's telling you that it's safe and it's nice and it's easy and it's not threatening in any way. And you could almost anthropomorphize that and say it's just like a baby, right? It's got a big rounded head, it's got big eyes, and it's got a small mouth, and so on. And you go and look at the Ferrari and the thing looks threatening, designed to be looking threatening. It looks powerful. It's got this great big engine under this great big bonnet. It's got a big grille, lots of teeth, right? And small headlights squinting at you, small windows, and so on. This is visual communication. It's actually telling you what to think about it. So when you're looking at a boat, the styling of the boat, first of all, you've got to know what imagery people have got in their heads. So I'm designing for a market which is reasonably familiar with traditional boats. So lap straight construction is very familiar to them in terms of its visual impact. I particularly like the boats that come from particularly the south of England. Yeah, and the working boats there. Now, they were built clinker style because it cost about half as much as building a carvel boat. Yeah, so the working people got clinker boats and the gentlemen got carvel, smooth-sided boats. But then comes the next thing is I have a look, for example, at the area where my customer is going to use the boat, and I go to something like McKee, right, which Mick will be familiar with the book, Working Boats of Great Britain. And they've got a map in there which shows you where all the various types come from. And it shows you what the weather is like, the prevailing weather. So from the northwest coast of Scotland, you had these huge, great big standing lug sail powered fishing boats. They went out on one tack and they came back on one tack. That's it. And you have a look somewhere else in the UK where they had to tack up a river and the rig would be totally different, because it would be suited to that use, and so on. So I'll look and I'll think, well, the area in which my customer is going to use the boat is going to require these handling characteristics. And that, say, a Humber yawl boat, right? They have loose-footed gaff rigged ketch. And they tack because they're going up and down a tidal river all the time. So they're loose-footed. And they have to be loose-footed because they've got two masts reasonably close together. So they set the foresail like a jib. And the after one is set to a boomkin. But that boat's designed for that particular purpose. So that, to some extent, dictates the style of the boat. But if you look underneath my boats, you will see late Bruce Farr, those sorts of guys, the Cherubs, which are having a real revival at the moment. They're getting up to 20 boats at a time now. So we look at the dinghies that were being built, designed and built in 70s and 80s, and look at those shapes and then adapt them to what I'm doing. So if you had a look at, say, an International 12, the racing skiffs, have a look at those shapes and then look at mine, you'll find that the lowest point of the hull is actually a bit further aft, because that's in part to support the crew and in part to get the nose up when the boat's moving at speed so that it'll pop up on the plane, things like that. So the underside of the boat is actually much more modern than the styling of the boat would suggest. But because of people's perception of their needs, they look at the boat and it registers with the image that they've got in their head, which is about that visual communication thing.
Thank you. That's interesting.
Yeah, so for me, that's been the really big insight from this talk so far. I guess I've looked at boats like the SCAMP, for example, and you think it's like a round, tubby shape, but then realizing that under the water, it's actually a very different shape, like a light scale sort of shape. And yeah, I guess I haven't put it together yet, but I can sort of see what you've been doing there with the other designs.
Right. But, you look at the mini-transat, which is a fairly extreme example. Their rules are 6.5 meters length of hull, 3 meters beam. Right? And most people would look at a boat with a beam length ratio like that and think, never going to go. The record for, I've designed 2 which have been built. One made it to the race, right? His fastest, his best day's run was 256 nautical miles, right? Which is 11 knots average for 24 hours, single-handed. His fastest recorded speed was 26 knots. Okay. We called it a unimaran because the catamaran guys were so upset with it.
Yeah, like in comparison, a good day's run for a boat that size would normally be maybe 60 to 100 miles.
100 miles would be a good day's run for a 21 footer.
Yeah, really good run. 2.5 times, John.
Yeah. And he was getting his sleep.
Yeah.
So is that are they off the wind boats? So they're for going downwind.
Well,
if they're for going across the Atlantic with the so they're it seems to me that they're broad hull like that and that sort of racing. So they're for racing across the Atlantic. So they were predominantly designed to go downwind.
Now, don't forget that they've got to go from Concarneau at the northern end of the Bay of Biscay down to the Canary Islands, and that's windward in shallow water with the whole of the Atlantic pushing waves into that shallows. It's a pretty horrifying place. It's renowned for being really, really rough. So the boat had to cope with that, going upwind through that. And then you've got, all going well, you've got light windward work for the first couple of 100 miles. And then you're in the trade winds because the Canaries are just north of the trade winds. Then you go through the doldrums and then you get down towards the Caribbean where you could get anything. So it had to be able to cope with all of that. So the boat was set up as 2 modes. It had a ballast tank up forward so we could change trim. It had a pair of dagger boards right up in the bow and they were handed, and a single dagger board right aft in the cockpit so that the balance could be changed. Right now, this is quite different to most of them, which have a big dagger board each side of the mast. And that's it, and plus rudder. I went down a different path with this, and the boat could be set up to self-steer on almost any course.
So you have the ballast goes, the water ballast, you have 2 tanks and you just pump it in?
This had a swing keel.
Right.
It had 300 kilograms on the end of a 2-meter lever, effectively. And because you swing it, you can't count on that for lateral plane. So it's just a streamlined lever, nothing else. And the boat really was sailing on the lee side bow board and a bit of the afterboard and its twin rudders. I can tell you, working out the geometry of the linking between the twin rudders was an interesting exercise, because the boat being so wide, if you're turning it sharply, the radius through which the rudders are going are very, very different. It's like the Ackerman steering geometry in a car.
Yeah,
Exactly the same.
So how many water ballast tanks did it have, John?
None.
No, none whatsoever. Okay.
No, just as, yeah. So we had effectively what was a V-shaped center case with a pivot running through the bottom of it, and the top of it went like that inside that V-shaped center case. Big, it had a line drive winch, hand winch. So there were no mechanics in it, no hydraulics, no electrical, all done by hand. Not the sort of thing you'd want to be using when you're tacking up a narrow channel. But it worked really, really well at sea, because you could plan your tacks an hour ahead.
Yeah.
So next.
Can I ask, John, with your designs, most of the ones I've looked at have the flat panel in the base of the hull. Is that for the ease of construction that you were talking about before? Is that part of that, or is there another?
Oh, there are several reasons. Ease of construction is a really large part of it, and it makes things very, very easy. You build a frame like a ladder, put some profiles up, which gives you the 4.5 curve, drop the panel on it, and from there on, you're stacking all your bulkheads and your stringers and everything on that, and wrap the planks around it. So it's really easy. Another one, though, is that a keel structure is generally quite heavy and quite complex and labor intensive to build. And we don't need it. It's simply not needed. There's no reason for it other than tradition. And another reason still is when you've got a bottom that shape, about that much of it, all it's trying to do is float. And you don't want that part of the boat to float. Right? So it's reducing your stability. As long as you can get a flat bottom to enter the water without disturbance as it's going through the water and release the water at the other end, a flat bottom's very efficient. And again, going back to SCAMP and a lot of the other ones, is they're only moving the water about this far. Whereas if you've got a deep V, it's got to move the water a lot further. And the further you move water, water being pretty heavy, the more energy it takes. And the more energy it takes, the slower the boat's going to be, because you've only got a limited amount of that stuff.
Yeah, good. Thanks.
Yeah, so those flat bottoms are a winner in every direction.
Right, okay, yeah, and I noticed, yeah, because if you look at one of your boats from above the waterline, you would never realise it had a flat underbody until you see the bottom of one.
So I don't tell people that it's a flat bottom boat, because a lot of people have quite negative impressions of flat bottom boats.
Yeah.
That doesn't have to be. I remember, what was that, Nick? What was that boat called? The Eel or the Elf? There was one that Doug Flat did, which was a completely flat bottom, but everything was like strip plank above, and it looked like it was
Steve Redmond Elva.
Elva. They sail like a cow in a bog. They really do. It's got no rocker.
Right. I suppose I was just thinking about the design thing, that you can have something very different above and below the waterline.
Yeah, but a flat bottom, the amount of rocker in a flat bottom is really, really important. You got to get that right. If it doesn't have the right amount of rocker in the right place, the water has to go around some very, very sharp corners, and it doesn't like doing that.
Yeah.
They lose energy. It costs.
Yeah, the the way we thought about it when we saw it being built, I was at that flat at that time, it made us all think of a VW Beetle, and it sailed about the same.
It sailed about the same as the Beetle, yeah.
Yeah.
I had mine afloat once.
Inverted, yeah.
Yeah.
But I should just say that some of Redmond's other boats, like the Wisp and Blue Jay and the others, are really excellent little boats.
Yeah, but that one wasn't.
But yeah, but his Volks boat was, yeah.
And that's why I like to build a boat from time to time. If I'm doing something that's a bit outside my normal range of experience, I'll build one. And I'll sail it for a while, and I'll come back in and either tear the plans up or put whatever alterations in are required.
So John, Ian Halbish, before he left, he had a question online saying he wanted to ask about alternative materials in light of the recent price rises of plywood. I guess he's asking what he can use instead of plywood for your designs.
Yeah, well, you can use any panel that is reasonably stiff or is reasonably consistent with the stiffness required of the design. And there are some being built of some of the exotic material panels. Some of them are being built in foam glass construction, none of which is cheaper than plywood, even with the current prices of plywood. And yep, I've done.
And also the labor costs involved. Yeah.
Well, one of the things,
so prefab panels might find a niche for home builders.
One of the things about plywood is it's very good for the amateur builder market, in that people will generally have sufficient skills to be able to use plywood and epoxy. Whereas if you put them into something else like welded aluminium or steel or glass foam, glass sandwich, and so on, it's outside their skill set. And I don't like strip plank simply because it's the most labor intensive way possible of building a boat. I've done two.
Yeah, I so very agree. Yeah, I learned my lesson on a 32-foot catamaran. Hull one just about killed me.
Yeah, and there was still one more to go.
And then there was another one when I turned over the page.
Yes.
Surely laminated paddle pop sticks would be more labor intensive.
Barely.
Yeah. But I have built a couple of cold molded boats. So I actually like cold molding. It's reasonably quick. It's very, very stiff and secure. Yeah.
Is that like is that like a mosquito fuselage or something? Is that the diagonal? Is that the diagonal planking?
Yeah.
Yeah. New Zealanders built cold molded boats in bulk in the 60s and 70s and 80s, amateur built. You get all the Townsend boats, and there are hundreds and hundreds of them still afloat. Were all cold molded.
And what's the labor involved in like when you sort of, what's the torture board equivalent of like when you, like I always imagine that because you're putting the strips on diagonally, that at the edges they'd be a bit proud and you'd have to sand them down. And so I just wondered what it's like physically like to finish or flatten a cold molded boat as opposed to like what we just described as being not good for what we talking about?
Strip planking.
Strip planking, yeah. What's the torture boarding phase like in comparison?
Well, I can tell you that keeping a strip plank boat fair is not that easy. right? They can, particularly when you're getting a bit of edge set in the planks, they can be very difficult to keep fair. They're real stinkers.
Not too bad on the outside, but the inside is 7 kinds of hell.
Oh yeah, and like a long slim boat like a catamaran hull was bad enough, right? But you try and do something that's a bit fatter, like a cutter, 3 beams to a length, and you're trying to go around the reverse curve down into the keel and things like that, and it's not fun. But it's, if you're doing strip plank and you're cutting the edges, if you can imagine, for example, you've got an orange in front of you and you slice it into quarters and then into eighths, and then you peel the piece of peel off, right? And then you think about diagonal planking on a hull, and you can see that the plank has to be tapered in order to fit around that curve. And there are techniques for doing that. And as long as you stick to the techniques, you don't have a problem with edge set or the edges standing up. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. It's just I've never had an opportunity to see it up close, so I was just wondering what it was like.
Take that too as a bit. Though John and I are critical of strip planking from our own experience, it does depend on the objective of the builder. So we shouldn't diss it too much.
Yeah. I mean, everything that we say as designers is based on our own experiences and what we've learned from the experiences of our customers. And sometimes we can be somewhat biased.
Yeah. Yeah, the most fun I've had boat building was doing the balsa canoe strip plank. That was huge fun.
That was was that the wee lassie?
Yeah, the wee lassie.
Yeah, that looked lovely.
Yeah, it was really big fun to do.
Yeah, you know. Strip planking a canoe is actually, it's good fun. Partly because the project's not huge, and the pieces are relatively small and quite flexible, and the hull is long and slim. Yeah. All good.
And the interior doesn't have a lot of area, thank goodness.
Yes. Mm. So, who's next there?
I was wondering something which sort of came up after Mick's last talk. If either of you had tried out much hydrofoiling stuff, because I know Mick was experimenting with it.
Sorry, I missed the end of that.
I know you were experimenting with foiling at one point. Did that go anywhere, or was it?
There are still some things on the simmering away. I won't announce anything, but there are things happening, partly to do with extending the range of electric power, if we can get it to work. If.
Yep. I tell you what, you do not want to know what goes on in the back of a designer's mind.
Oh.
See, I misheard the question. I thought you'd been doing experiments with oiling. But that was actually, and I got really curious, and I thought, yeah, that's the whole history of my boat, has been discovering what bits I shouldn't have oiled and which bits I should have finished with epoxy and which bits should have been varnished, because I suddenly realized oil goes terrible with epoxy and all that sort of thing. Yeah. And I still haven't had a straight answer ever about what to oil and what to epoxy and what to varnish.
Well, it sounds like a morning boat, right? It's very oily.
Oh, that's a terrible pun.
My head hurts.
Okay, so who's next?
I ask, has anyone completed a long steps yet, John, or is yours the
Yeah,
first?
there's 4 of them sailing. One of them absolutely blitzed the field in the Salish 100. That was Phil McCowan. Howard went over to Phil's place and the pair of them built the thing in about a month. It's not exactly Chippendale furniture, but it's strong and it's not going to break, and it looks fine from about 10 paces out, which is about how I build. And yeah, Phil sailed it in the Salish 100 and he said that performance was magic. Even under oars, it was faster than anything else that was rowing except the pure rowing boats, which is really what I was aiming at. And something happened that I was very, very pleased to hear about. As he said, he was sailing along, only just moving. And this is, I'll speak to this a little bit more in a minute. He was only just moving, and the Puget Sound area has got a lot of big hills around it, a lot of narrow channels. So he thought, oh yeah, we're not doing anything much. I'll rinse my coffee cup out. So he's over the side, right? Head and shoulders over the side, reaching down to the water. He's kneeling on the main sheet and he got hit by a gust. The next thing, he's head and shoulders in the water with the gunnel under. So he scrambled back into the boat, releasing the main sheet at the time, and the boat popped back up again and carried on. There was maybe 1 bucket full of water in it. So yes, I liked that. But something to bear in mind when you're considering rigs is that if you have a large lug sail main and a small mizzen, when the boat is not moving forward actively and it's hit by a gust, it will bear away, because your static windage is quite different to the center of effort when the boat is moving and the sails are drawing properly. Yeah. So you've got this big wind catcher up the front and you've got a little wind catcher down the back, and the boat will pivot away from the wind just in those circumstances. But it's as well to be aware of that if you're tacking, say, into a marina in a very confined space where the wind is patchy. So you need to drop the main sheet, let the main go if there's a gust hitting. Otherwise, the thing's going to bear away, and you may not want that. But yes, there are several of them sailing. The owners are out there doing it. They've had some pretty amazing adventures, a couple of them, and very happy with the boats. And I'm very much looking forward to getting mine done.
Was the one in the event, was that pulling 1 pair of oars?
Yep, just Phil on his own.
Wow, cool.
Yep, and he had some little 7-foot oars, which were nowhere near. But I've got a pair of Duckworks 2-piece oars and some Gecko oarlocks. So I shall be, yeah, I wanted to be able to row into places like a narrow estuary or a marina or somewhere where sailing was not going to be practical, or if I'm sitting out there in Elgin and there's no wind at all, I wanted to be able to make some kind of progress. And apparently the things will row quite comfortably at about 3 knots. They'll go faster, but at 3 knots, they're not burning a lot of power. The boat's actually designed around the rowing station. That's why it's got the rig it has, is to keep the rig out of the rowing area. If you put a sloop rig in it, the mast and boom are in the way, you can't row it.
How many hours are you talking to build one, do you think?
Depends on how hard you work.
Yeah, of course.
Now, seriously, there's no answer to that really, but what I do is I say to people, I'm not a qualified boat builder. but I have a very well-equipped workshop, or I will have in a few weeks' time again. And I'm practiced, and I've got all the machinery that a man could ever wish for, and it will take me X amount of hours to build that boat. And in the case of long steps, probably in the very early 200 hours. And if you think you're as fast as me, that's what it'll take you. If you think you're half as fast as me, it'll take you twice as much.
Yeah.
But, you know, I have the advantage of knowing what the designer wanted to happen. Sometimes. I might have forgotten.
And presumably
yeah,
you
it's nice
follow
to
the
have someone
instructions
point the
too.
finger at though.
I'm trying out a set of oars tomorrow for the first time. Put oar locks on my Cherry 16.
Yep.
Which is difficult because it's very wide.
Yep.
But I like the way that the hull's sealed. It's sealed. I didn't want to put the row lock through the thwart or the side of the hull or side of the top of the boat. So I've put a sort of a raised oar locks.
Yep.
Where the
lifted up on a block.
thing comes down between, doesn't go into the boat.
Yep.
So that it raises the oars up. So and I've got 2.4 meter oars that I got off another skiff of mine, timber oars. So yeah, I'll have to see if I can row it.
You'll be able to move it around, but it's probably not going to be comfortable, right? So what you need is you need your heels to be about 225 millimeters below the seat.
Yeah.
You need the seat to be about 200 millimeters below the throat of the rollock.
Yeah.
And that the rollock pin needs to be about 325 to 340 millimeters aft of the after edge of the seat. Now,
yeah, it's like 12 to 13 inches, isn't it?
Yeah, all of those measurements vary a little bit according to your build, but that's the 95%.
Yeah, I knew it's not really a rowing boat, so it's for manoeuvring. I like oars. I like being able to just, come in to where I want to anchor and just get myself offshore enough to raise sail, or just not looking to use them for rowing long distances, just for manoeuvring pretty much.
Well, in that case, I would suggest that you fit a rollock about 300 millimeters off center on your stern, and you learn how to scull it.
Yeah,
you can get into tight spaces like that, which you can't get into when you've got the full spread of oars out.
Yeah. I was wanting to mount on the sculling position on the back as well. I haven't got to that yet. I've just got the oar locks on at this stage. See how I go. I'm going to Jervis or to St George's Basin tomorrow morning, very early, and I'll see how it goes. I'll launch it and see if I can row out a bit.
Yep, good. Yep, well done. I'm a fan of rowing.
Yeah, that's the thing. I don't think I'd like a boat without oars. Yeah, cruising boat, dinghy cruising boat anyway.
So, next, please. Good discussion.
So, can I ask a sort of philosophical sort of question? I make little videos that I put on YouTube, and I actually made the mistake of looking at Google Analytics, which said that most of my, 68% or something of my viewership were over 65, which I thought, this is a sort of an alarming statistic. I mean, is the demographic of dinghy cruisers older codgers? And are we all going to die off, or is there a future for it? I guess is my question.
Oh, the standard the standard dinghy cruiser has got a grey beard, an American style baseball hat, a pair of sunglasses, a t-shirt, and a pair of jeans, right?
Yeah.
And that's the worldwide almost.
Yeah.
Some of them have got more hair than others.
Yeah.
But
so are we
we are seeing here, dinghy cruising is probably the only gross area in the whole of the recreational marine field other than aluminium fishing boats. And so it's growing. It's only tiny, but it is growing, and we are getting more younger people. But it's a tiny, tiny little fraction of the total recreational marine scene.
Yeah.
In Europe, they seem to somehow attract a broader. I find, that in Spain and Italy and France, they get a broader, like they get more women in, and they get the occasional younger person, but they all seem to be oldies everywhere else.
Yeah, well, just seen Lorenzo.
Don't know how they do it.
Lorenzo with his gang of 3 Pathfinders out in Sardinia.
Gosh, what great pictures!
Yeah,
beautiful.
And that's lovely to see. And so I don't really know the answer to that, but we have an oddball thing going on in the whole of Western society, is that we've got this great big bump in the population graph born between the end of World War II and about 1955. Right, so from say 60 to 75-year-olds, that's the big bump, and a lot of us in that age group have got some resources, and we've got time. So that's what we're out there doing. And gone is the days when 65 years old, you were gifted a wicker chair and you sat on the porch until you died, which was generally not very long. And now it's the start of the next life. Which is really good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I'm not complaining.
Going back to what Mick was saying about life changing, and my comment about particularly about older men, there's a huge bump in that demographic, and it is really a life changer to get involved in something like dinghy cruising, and it forms communities which are very, very, people have a common interest, and they develop friendships which are very, very valuable. People without friends tend not to last long. If you're part of a community with common interests and common goals, you've got a real reason to stay alive.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm interested in sailing, but I do watch a lot of van dwellers in the US, and there's a guy called Bob. He does cheap RV.
I know the man.
And he's got a whole philosophy, and they get together in great communities, and they all meet out in the desert, and it's sort of similar but on wheels. And yeah, that seems to, a lot of them seem happier than you'd think, because they all look like bums in vans, but they all seem to be, some of them seem to be having a jolly good time, actually.
Well,
they're a similar age group.
Anyone who's been following my personal Facebook page will know that I've been living in a 6.5 meter camper van for the last 18 months, and I've been having a really good time. But
yeah,
earlier this week I signed up for a house. A nice little house. It's got a big garage. It's got a hot tub. It's 400 meters from the boat ramp. Yeah, just about got everything I need.
Right. Very good.
Sounds good.
I'm looking forward to it. Just got to wait for the thing to go final. There was a previous bid on it, but the lady with the previous bid has 5 days in which to list her home, sell it, and get it unconditional, or her deal falls over. 5 working days. I think I've got a reasonable chance. So the first job will be long steps. Get that finished. So talking about boats for purpose, this just occurred to me, is that the Kopu Bridge near Thames, across the Wairoa River, is too low to sail under. And one of the things about long steps is that it's very, very quick and easy to rig. So I can row the thing downstream, fly up at the marina just down the bottom, stand the rig up and head on out. And on the way back, I go back to the marina and I wait for the tide to start running in, drop the rig, go back up to the boat ramp. It was 400 meters away, means I can go down, launch the boat, take the tow vehicle and the trailer back to my house and lock it up. So how are we going? Anybody else with questions? Either I've explained things incredibly well and there's no possible questions left, or you guys are a bit shy. Come on.
I think most people are. So Terry, Rob, Ross, I assume it's Quentin, Noel, anyone else want to raise something today?
I'll give a quick question. That's right. I've seen a couple of Hartleys with Gaff rigs, and I thought, gee, that looks like a good idea. I wonder what you think of that.
Oh, good. Like I say, I'm a fan of Gaff rig. You can get a lot more area, a lot lower down on a shorter mast, which is a help on a trailer boat.
Yeah.
And it's very controllable. The 4-sided sails are incredibly tunable, and you don't need so much force. If you have a look at 3-sided sail, and even if it's got a square top on it, some of the forces involved with a conventional boom and a high aspect ratio sail, you've got very high sheet tensions, and you need a really, really strong vang to control the twist. Well, with a Gaff rig, it tends to be easier. This is for a cruiser, even up to fast cruiser. And the Hartley, a lot of them, I don't think there's been any new ones built for many years, but a lot of them, the sails are shot, the rigs are getting pretty tired, and to re-rig them, you could do that with a Gaff rig very easily.
Yeah, no, that's what I've got a really old one, and the sails are all old, and my other boat is a Heron, so I know the Gunter rig, and I really like that. But this one that I've seen.
Sticker?
Sorry, what's that?
Is that a bumper sticker? My other boat is a Heron.
Yeah. Well, actually, my other boat is a Hartley.
It depends on which side of the driveway you're standing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But yeah, so the one that I've seen has got a bowsprit, so that the jib is further forward. I'm just wondering how necessary that would be. So, whether I can just use the existing mast step and put a Gaff or a Gunter rig on that, and just use the jib stay where it is without having to put a bowsprit and move it further forward.
Okay, when you look at the shape of a gaff sail and overlay it with your triangular sail, you'll see that there is a lot more sail aft.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you need to balance that.
Yeah.
Typically by putting a bowsprit on and pushing the jib out a bit further.
Yeah.
And I've found that gaff rigs, you need a little bit more lead of center of effort over center of lateral plane than you do with a conventional Marconi rig.
Yeah.
To go from say 10 to 12.5%, about that much. Otherwise you end up with quite strong weather helm.
Yeah.
I've got one inquiry question. With the Cherry, I have a problem. It's very hard to go forward on. They're pretty unstable, and I've got a Hank-on sail that I've rigged to pull down. Like I can lower by I run a very small line up through the Hanks.
Yep.
I can pull that down. But it's not really satisfactory. And I was wanting to put a furler on it, but the sail goes right up to where the stays meet the mast, because the stays don't go to the top of the mast.
Yes.
And it's right down the bottom, so I can't get a furler in. I was wondering, it's got lee helm anyway. If I could you trim make the jib a bit smaller?
Yes, I would strongly suggest you do that. If the jib goes right to the top of the forestay, that's not a good trick. You need some clearance in there. So I would take 250, 300 millimeters off the foot of the sail.
Yeah.
Right, and those boats are prone to lee helm at low speeds anyway, and that's probably made it somewhat worse. But yeah, a furler would be good on one of those.
Ivy?
Yeah, good. Because I can sew and stuff. I got a good machine, so I might do some surgery.
Yeah. Yep. So get the scissors out.
Yeah. Good.
And you can make the eyelet for the clue out of a small piece of copper pipe. Stick it, get it red hot, and then drop it into water or oil. Do that a couple of times to soften it up, and use a ball peen hammer.
Yeah.
Poke it through the hole and use a ball peen hammer and swell the edges over.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. No, I've got the for cutting out the eyelets. I usually heat them up with a MAP gas torch. Yep. And just quickly dab it, and it seals around the where it makes the opening.
Gotcha. Yep.
So yeah, I've done a bit of. I put reefs in a couple of mains now on my heron, and now I've just done it on the put 3 reefs in the main sole for the Cherry now. So
good, you're doing well. Right, next. Any more? Are we there then?
It might be bedtime in well, bedtime in New Zealand, isn't it, for you guys? Is it
11:15? But I don't have to be anywhere particular tomorrow.
I'm going to head off. Thanks very much, John, and everyone. Good chat.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Yep.
See you.
Right, yeah. So thank you very much for your time, John, and I
Yeah.
really appreciate you talking to us.
Right. Well,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you, John.
Great session.
Thanks,
Thank you.
John.
Really interesting.
Right.
Really, really
Thank
good.
you. Well, thank you, everybody.
Yep.
Yeah, this is fun. Good to meet you all.
Yep.
Even if only virtually.
Yeah.
Great.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. And good night.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Kim,
everyone.
for the in. Thank you
Okay,
for the
bye.
invitation.
Bye.